the artist formerly known as Terence Trent Darby.
He was being pursued by the paparazzi a lot.
What do you think about the comparisons that have been made about you and with Prince and people like Michael Jackson?
Remember Terence Trent D'Arby? In the late 80s, he was unstoppable, hailed as the next Prince, topping charts with Wishing Well and Sign Your Name. For a moment, he seemed destined for legend, appearing on every stage and magazine cover. Then, almost overnight, he vanished.
And there was a period of time where I just had to take a rest because it had just gone so fast, it had gotten so much, so quickly, so soon, that it was like an overload for a while.
Was it ego, fame, or the ruthless music industry that swallowed him whole?
Tend to whip them up to a frenzy a little bit.
It's quite fun. It's sort of, you get bored and you figure, what can I do today? So you figure, well, I've got a good quote, why don't I just wind up the press some more? It's quite fun.
Years later, he resurfaced with a story stranger than anyone imagined. When Terence Trent D'Arby reintroduced himself to the world under the new name Sananda Maitreya, it wasn't a publicity stunt. To him, it was a spiritual rebirth, a necessary transformation after years of personal battles with depression, industry backlash, and a sense that the music business had chewed him up and spit him out. Yet for many, the name change became a symbol of his downfall rather than his renewal.
Even if you created this name, son, it does not belong to you. This property you created, this asset you created, this is ours now.
Back in the late 80s, Terence Trent D'Arby was being marketed as the next Prince. He had the moves, the voice, the attitude, and an album introducing the hardline. According to Terence Trent D'Arby, that sold more than 1 million copies in just a few days. But critics say he talked too much, too soon. He declared himself bigger than Michael Jackson and Prince, and in an industry where humility and PR relationships often outweigh raw talent, this was seen as arrogance.
You did say of the first album, Hardline, Hardline was the best debut album by a male solo act in this century, which are quite grand words.
By the mid-90s, his star had dimmed. He struggled with his label, Columbia Records, which wanted him to stick to his proven formula of funk pop hits. Instead, D'Arby wanted to experiment, fusing rock, soul, and psychedelic influences. When albums like Neither Fish Nor Flesh, 1989, and Symphony or Damn, 1993, failed to replicate his debut's success, industry executives pulled back their support. He felt abandoned, misunderstood, and suffocated by expectations. That's when the transformation began. Around 2001, Terence Trent D'Arby legally changed his name to Sananda Maitreya. He explained it as the result of a deep psychological and spiritual crisis. Terence Trent D'Arby was dead. He watched his suffering as he died a noble death. After intense pain, I meditated for a new spirit, a new will, a new identity. To him, the name change wasn't just cosmetic, it was a survival mechanism. He believed he had to shed the burden of his old self, the cocky, headline-making star who had been chewed up by fame to truly live again. But to the public, this shift felt like disappearing. Fans who remembered the soulful brilliance of Sign Your Name or the explosive energy of Wishing Well suddenly couldn't find him. Radio stopped playing him. The press mocked the new name, calling it bizarre or eccentric. In the early 2000s, with the internet still developing as a music platform, rebranding yourself without a major label meant near total obscurity. Still, Sananda Maitreya wasn't done making music. He moved to Europe, settling in Italy, and built his own independent label, Treehouse Publishing. Away from the commercial machine of New York, Los Angeles, and London, he began quietly releasing albums that reflected his true artistry. Wildcard in 2001, Angels and Vampires in 2005, and Prometheus and Pandora in 2017. These works were sprawling, multi-disc experiments blending rock, classical, funk, and soul. While they never charted high, they represented freedom, the music he always wanted to make without compromise. Critics, however, were divided. Some saw him as a cautionary tale, an artist who burned bridges and walked away from fame. Others recognized him as a pioneer, one of the first major stars to embrace independence in an era before streaming made it fashionable. Sananda himself shrugged off both perspectives. To him, living authentically mattered more than chasing charts. And yet, the myth of whatever happened to Terence Trent Darby haunted him. He went from selling out arenas to playing small shows for die-hard fans in Europe. The American audience that once crowned him a star had moved on. To many, it seemed like he had vanished. But the truth was more complex. He didn't vanish. He chose exile, a quieter form of survival. The story of Terence Trent Darby's transformation into Sananda Maitreya is a lesson about identity in the entertainment industry. It raises difficult questions. Can an artist ever truly reinvent themselves without being erased? Is reinvention a sign of weakness or the ultimate act of strength? For Sananda, the answer is clear. He had to kill Terence to save himself. But for the public, the man once hailed as a generational talent remains frozen in time. They still see the young, cocky, electrifying performer who dared to challenge Prince and Michael Jackson, and then seemingly vanished. This disconnect between perception and reality is why his story is so haunting. It's not just about a star who fell. It's about a man who chose to step away, only to discover that the world would rather forget him than learn his new name. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest irony of all. Terence Trent Darby walked into the late 80s with swagger, confidence, and a voice that made critics call him the second coming. The problem? He was standing in the middle of giants. Prince and Michael Jackson weren't just stars. They were planets with their own gravitational pull. And Darby? He was expected to orbit them. The media framed him as Prince 2.0, a funky, soulful heir who could strut, scream, and croon with equal flair. But here's the twist. Instead of ducking that comparison, he leaned into it, boldly, almost recklessly. He told reporters he was better than both. He even suggested that Jackson and Prince were yesterday's news while he was the future.
What do you think about the comparisons that have been made about you and with Prince and people like Michael Jackson?
I think with Prince, to be fair, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're both of similar complexion. Beyond that, I don't really see that.
But in the music industry, there's a rule. You don't step on the crowns of royalty unless you're ready for war. Prince ignored him. Michael brushed him off, but their shadows hung over every note he sang. Even his hits, Wishing Well and Sign Your Name, were compared to Purple Rain-era Prince or off-the-wall era Michael. Instead of being celebrated as original, he became trapped in their narrative. The world didn't want another Prince or another Michael. And slowly, his boldness started looking like arrogance. This was the weight of comparison, and it crushed him before he could fully stand alone.
If I were Bobby Womack's complexion, what Prince would have to do with this, I think a lot of it has to do with that.
By the early 90s, Terence Trent Darby had it all. Platinum records, Grammy recognition, and the kind of mystique artists dream of. But behind the scenes, he was fighting an invisible enemy, the industry itself. He wasn't willing to play the game. Labels wanted him to smile, tone down his confidence, and stay in line. But Darby wasn't built for submission. He believed he was destined for legendary greatness, and he wasn't shy about saying it.
Tend to whip them up to a frenzy a little bit.
It's quite fun. It's sort of, you get bored and you figure, what can I do today? So you figure, well, I've got a good quote, why don't I just wind up the press some more? It's quite fun.
That ego, whether you call it confidence or delusion, made executives nervous. And in an industry where relationships matter more than raw talent, Darby began burning bridges. The press turned against him, framing him as difficult. Radio programmers cooled off. Even collaborators started walking away. When his follow-up albums didn't sell like Introducing the Hardline, Critics used it as proof. He peaked too soon. He believed his own hype.
What happened with the last one?
Basically, I think it was too different from what people were expecting me to follow up the hardline with.
In truth, the music wasn't the problem. The problem was the machine. He refused to compromise, and the machine doesn't forgive rebellion unless you're bulletproof like Prince or Madonna. By the mid-90s, the same industry that once called him a genius had closed its doors. His name slipped from headlines, and his once bright flame flickered into silence. For Terence Trent Darby, ego wasn't just part of the story, it was the turning point. By the early 90s, Terence Trent Darby wasn't just another name in music. He was positioning himself alongside the greats. And when you're climbing that high, you're bound to brush up against legends. One of those figures was Michael Jackson, the undisputed king of pop. Now, what made this clash interesting wasn't just music, it was personality. Darby had a boldness that rubbed people the wrong way. He openly criticized other artists and compared himself to the likes of Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, and Prince. And when it came to Michael Jackson, he didn't hold back. In an era when almost no one publicly challenged Michael, Darby dared to question his artistry and his image.
But I think if you look at them, if you look at, Prince, Michael Jackson, and the ones that have achieved that level, they've either been kind of more amorphous.
That kind of commentary struck a nerve. Michael Jackson, who by this point had conquered the charts with Thriller and Bad, didn't take kindly to challengers. And according to insiders, Michael quietly blacklisted artists who came at him. He had that much power in the industry. If he didn't like you, executives didn't like you either. Industry whispers suggest that Darby's bold claims made him persona non grata in certain circles. MTV rotations slowed. Radio support wavered. Labels that once saw him as the next big thing suddenly treated him like a liability. But here's the thing. Darby wasn't wrong about being talented. His live performances stunned crowds. His voice had depth, soul, and a raw power that Michael himself reportedly respected. But talent alone doesn't guarantee survival in a business where politics run deep. Adding fuel to the fire, Darby styled himself in ways that drew inevitable comparisons. He rocked braids and flamboyant stage outfits, echoes of both Michael and Prince. Critics accused him of imitation, even though he saw it as reinvention. And as those criticisms mounted, Michael's shadow grew even larger over his career. For Michael, it was simple. He didn't need to respond. His silence said enough. But for Darby, the lack of acknowledgement only pushed him further into frustration. He wanted recognition, validation, even rivalry. Instead, what he got was distance, and distance in the music industry can kill momentum faster than a bad record. By the mid-90s, Terence Trent Darby's name wasn't headlining arenas anymore. Fans who remembered his breakout hit Wishing Well were confused. What happened to the man who once said he'd change the face of pop? Many pointed back to his clash with Michael as the turning point. But let's be clear, this wasn't just about one feud. It was about a young, fiery artist stepping into an industry where giants ruled and miscalculating just how much power those giants had. Michael Jackson didn't need to destroy Darby's career. The weight of his silence and the industry's reaction to that silence did the work. The feud with Michael Jackson was less about direct battles and more about perception. And perception, as history shows, can make or break you. For Terence, this chapter marked the beginning of a long decline, one that even his immense talent couldn't immediately reverse. It was 1987, and the world of music was about to be shaken by a man with dreadlocks, a sharp jawline, and a voice so powerful it seemed to channel soul legends from the past. His name was Terence Trent Darby, and his debut album, introducing the hardline according to Terence Trent Darby, Yai, would become one of the most electrifying launches in pop history. The industry wasn't prepared for him. At a time when pop was dominated by Michael Jackson's Bad era, George Michael's faith, and Prince's endless reinventions, here came a fresh face with the audacity to not just join the conversation, but demand the spotlight. From the very first single, If You Let Me Stay, listeners could tell this wasn't just another R&B newcomer. His voice carried grit and gospel. His presence demanded attention, and his lyrics cut across genres. But it was the second single, Wishing Well, that turned him into a global star. It shot to #1. One on the US Billboard Hot 100 in 1988, earning him comparisons to Marvin Gaye, Otis Redding, and Sam Cooke. But Terence wasn't content with just being labeled soulful. He wanted to be seen as revolutionary. His debut album went on to sell over 12 million copies worldwide, an astonishing feat for a newcomer. Critics hailed him as the future of soul pop. Rolling Stone called him the real thing. Even skeptics admitted he had the charisma and the raw talent to dominate for decades. And Terence himself, he didn't hide how big he thought he was. He famously declared that his album was better than the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. A bold statement, one that instantly divided the public. Some saw it as arrogance, others saw it as youthful confidence. Either way, it made headlines. On stage, he was electric, dressed in flamboyant suits, moving with the swagger of James Brown and the sensuality of Prince. Terence Trent Darby gave performances that people still describe as hypnotic. He could switch from falsetto to a growl in the same line, commanding audiences with a mixture of vulnerability and bravado. It wasn't just music. He had the look. Photographers adored him. Fashion houses invited him to shows, and magazines rushed to put him on their covers. Within months, Terence became a global icon.
He was being pursued by the paparazzi a lot.
But while the rise was fast, it was also dangerous. Few artists in history have shot to fame with such intensity. Even fewer have survived it. The problem wasn't talent. Terence had more than enough of that. The problem was the weight of expectations. The industry, the press, and the fans saw him as the next Michael or the next Prince. And when you're positioned as the successor to legends, the spotlight doesn't just shine, it burns. Behind the scenes, record executives wanted him to repeat his success endlessly. The pressure was immense. Terence himself began believing the myth around him, leaning into bold statements and confrontational interviews. The same confidence that fueled his rise would soon feed his downfall. But in 1987 and 1988, none of that mattered. At that moment, Terence Trent Darby was unstoppable. His debut wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural earthquake. Fans believed he was destined to be one of the greats, shoulder to shoulder with Michael Jackson, Prince, and Stevie Wonder. The irony? That same comparison, the one that crowned him a prodigy, would later become the very weight that crushed him. The mid-1980s was a period where the music industry craved the next big thing. MTV had reshaped the way audiences consumed music, an image now carried as much weight as talent. Into this climate walked Terence Trent Darby, a man who embodied both. From the very beginning, he carried himself less like a newcomer and more like a destined icon. He was sharp, stylish, and utterly confident. Some would say cocky, but in an era of flamboyant personalities, his boldness only made him stand out more. In 1987, Darby released his debut album, introducing the hardline according to Terence Trent Darby. Even the title sounded like a manifesto, and in many ways, it was. The record didn't just introduce him as an artist, it presented him as a revolutionary voice, someone here to reset the rules of pop and soul music. Backed by Columbia Records, the project had all the polish of a major label release, but also a rawness that felt authentic. The mix of soul, rock, funk, and pop made it both timeless and contemporary, instantly grabbing attention. The album's breakout single, Wishing Well, stormed up the charts. It hit #1 on the US Billboard Hot 100 in 1988, and Darby became one of the rare British acts of that time to dominate America on their first try. His raspy, seductive vocal delivery was often compared to Prince, though he made it clear in interviews that he wasn't looking to be anyone's copy. "I'm me," he declared. "Prince is great, Michael is great, but they're not me." That kind of self-assuredness was unusual, and it immediately became part of his identity. But Wishing Well wasn't his only hit. Songs like Sign Your Name and Dance Little Sister showcased his versatility. He could croon a delicate ballad with the tenderness of Marvin Gaye and then, moments later, unleash the kind of funk groove that could fill dance floors worldwide. Critics took note. Many hailed him as the next great soul star, placing him alongside giants like Stevie Wonder and Al Green in terms of vocal prowess. The album went on to sell over 1 million copies in the US alone and millions more worldwide, eventually earning him a Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. Success, however, didn't just come in record sales. Darby's live performances added another layer to his appeal. On stage, he was magnetic. Dressed in military jackets, flowing shirts, or sharp suits, he combined the swagger of Mick Jagger with the intensity of James Brown. Audiences described him as unpredictable, electric, and sometimes even overwhelming. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was destined for greatness, and he often said as much. That conviction made some fans adore him, and others roll their eyes. Either way, people were talking. By 1989, Darby was no longer just a promising newcomer. He was a global star. He performed on some of the biggest stages, including Live Aid follow-ups and major international festivals. The press hailed him as the future of pop, the one who could carry the torch from legends like Prince and Michael Jackson. For a while, it seemed they might be right. Here was a man with the talent, the look, and the ambition to dominate not just the charts but the cultural conversation. Yet even at his peak, hints of trouble lurked. Darby wasn't shy about criticizing the industry that had made him famous. He openly said he was better than many of his peers, a comment that earned him headlines but also alienated colleagues. Journalists loved to quote him declaring things like, "My album is better than Sgt. Pepper's." It was bold, it was brash, and it planted the first seeds of a backlash. While his talent was undeniable, his confidence often crossed into arrogance, and that would soon come back to haunt him. For now, though, Terence Trent Darby was untouchable. His debut had made him one of the most talked-about artists in the world. He had achieved what many only dreamed of: global fame, critical acclaim, and artistic validation. To most, he was the man of the moment. But for Darby himself, this was just the beginning. He believed his destiny was far greater than a few hit records. He wasn't here to be another star. He was here to be the star. And that conviction would shape everything that came next. Terence Trent Darby's story is one of brilliance, pressure, and rebirth. He rose like a comet, clashed with giants, then disappeared only to return as Sananda Maitreya. Some see tragedy, others see freedom. What's clear is this: he chose survival over fame, proving reinvention can be the ultimate legacy.